going to do an Asian jazz festival, it can't just be a one-off where we just do it and yay. There's got to be a bigger purpose. There's got to be something that that draws people to it, where you're left thinking about something, that you want to change something, that you want to build something, where you don't just want to like swipe up or push a like on it, right? We want to be able to say that there's something that we're moving forward and moving towards. And I wrote about this, maybe about 8 or 9 years ago. But so I grew up in Seattle, Washington, and I didn't actually hear jazz until I was about maybe like 15 or 16. I had no intentions of ever being a musician, but I did grow up playing piano and violin, and I actually improvised out of necessity because I hated practicing. So I figured out that if I could make up stuff that kind of imitated what was on the page, I could actually, you could put so regular music is maybe a little bit larger than this, but comic books are slightly smaller. And from the back side, if you put up music and you put a comic book in the middle, you can actually get a lot of comics read, and while your fingers are just sort of improvising, and because your parents don't know the difference, right? So that was actually a practical thing if you really want to get into it. But growing up, like I remember countless, times of being ashamed of who I was, not the least of, which reason was because of, all the strife going on in my immigrant family. They came over in 1970. My brother was born in 1971. I was born in 74. You look back on it, if you got, a young man, young woman, two kids, in a culture, in a climate that they don't know the language, they don't really know what's happening. They're got to raise two kids. There's tension in the house already, right? So learning about that, this idea of like what they must have been going through. But when you're a kid, you're embarrassed by that, and what I'll never forget though, when it came to music, I had the incredible fortune in a sea of whiteness to have the majority of all of my most like regaled music teachers, the ones that inspired me, all just happened to be black men. And I could never understand why they never promoted the black conductor, because he was clearly better than everybody. It took me much longer to realize probably why, right? It took me a while to understand why are all these black men being treated differently than the white ones that I am seeing. It took me a long time to realize that inequality reached all the way into my own life, and yet I was ignorant of it because the thing is, a lot of my teachers never talked to me about it. They were only concerned with me. And it wasn't until much, much later that I had the courage to actually ask them. And a lot of times they didn't want to speak to me. They didn't want to they wanted to, in some ways, they wanted to shield me from a lot of their experiences, right? Which is like heartbreaking. And I think that in the middle of things like jazz, jazz is often seen by the community as entertainment and cool and class and $65 cover charges and $40 drinks, which are a sign that somehow, we're the upper crust of things. But jazz is also, a lot of tension and release, a lot of tension. And it was kind of like I was kind of darkly joking that maybe that's the part that the Asians can relate to from a family standpoint, because there's a lot of tension in a lot of households where you have immigrant parents. But being able to navigate that tension and release is part of the design of having a AAPI Jazz Fest too. Because if you look in this room right now, there's a lot of diversity. But, I don't see a whole lot of people who look like us sitting in that audience. And I can't but wonder, why is that? And can we do something about that? Can we actually tackle the elephant in the room and say, are there places where the black population and the Asian population have any place to actually reach some sort of interactive ground? Or are we just going to let the default continue to be separation? I can name it. I see it. I teach in a private school. I have kids who go to public school, right? But I'm not white and I'm not black. So my perspective doesn't fall into either of those narratives. But if you're playing jazz music, as far as I'm concerned, you have an obligation to speak up for the community, for the black community, for the musicians community. If you really want it to be about actual jazz, then it can't be just about you and entertaining and getting a gig. It's about learning where it came from, learning about yourself, and learning how that all kind of like works together. Now, I know this is probably way into this is probably not exactly, like the friendliest and easiest of conversations to have. But I will say this, it is the most important conversation to have. Maybe not with words, but with notes. Maybe not with words, but with action and presence. Because it says the world to me to see you out there. You don't need to say anything for me to be moved beyond belief. And I don't know, but I think I can probably speak on behalf of all of us as Asians, the overwhelming gratitude that we sometimes never get to express to the black community that supports us. Because we're never in a position where we even say things to each other, let alone the community at large. So we just put together a jazz festival and make it a little more subtle. Right? Yeah?